All right, welcome back to Is It Prophecy here on Israel National Radio, Ruth Sheva. The show is syndicated as Messiah Hour on YouTube. Go to YouTube, type in Messiah Hour as Ari Lewis, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Check out some of our previous episodes with Rabbi Yosef Mizrahi, Dr. Gerald Schroeder, Rabbi David Katz, and much, much more. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, or complaints, it is a Jewish country, email me at messiahhour@gmail.com. And if you like the show, you're getting a benefit out of it, then send a donation via PayPal to IsraelSportsRadio.yahoo.com. Donations from this audience, from these fans, they really make the show thrive and survive, and we want to take the show to a couple of new levels. If you're listening to this show right now, you're only hearing it in the left side of your headphones or your right side, depending on your setup. That's because we don't have the equipment this show deserves or the audience deserves. So send a PayPal donation. IsraelSportsRadio.yahoo.com. Any amount is appreciated. Right now, we're going to play Shira Nussdorf's interview with Rabbi Ken Spiro, and we'll have more after this interview. This is It Prophecy on IsraelNationalRadio.com.
Joining us now is Rabbi Ken Spiro. Rabbi Spiro, hi. Thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me.
I spoke today to a lot of people about whether or not Jews should or should not celebrate New Year's. Can you give us a little historical background about what actually New Year's is celebrating?
Well, I mean, for most people today, New Year's doesn't have religious significance. I mean, one could say the same thing about Christmas, actually, for a lot of people. But the origins of New Year's are quite interesting. The original connection with the beginning of the year, calendars used to be pretty arbitrary things people would play around with when they began and ended, but it's actually Julius Caesar, the first Roman Caesar, who set that date as the beginning of the year, and he picked that month because it's actually named after the god Janus, who is the god of doors and entrances, a two-faced god, and I guess Julius Caesar figured it would be appropriate to have a god looking backward and forward to transition between years. But the connection with New Year's, the beginning of the year, begins in the year 46 BCE, before the Common Era. And it's actually also connected historically with Caesar's suppression of a revolt in Israel, in Galilee, which led to the slaughter of a lot of Jews and a lot of political and physical oppression of the Jewish people. So that's already a sign, and it would be connected with wild partying at the time, only added to the violence that's directed towards the Jewish people.
Now, let me ask you a question, Rabbi. You know, a lot of times here when we are in seminary or yeshiva, the rabbis sort of tell us, you know, the whole world sort of revolves around the Jewish people. But what you're saying right now in terms of New Year's and celebration, it really seems like the whole world revolves around Jewish people or the persecution of them, if what they're actually celebrating on New Year's is this festival of Janus, is what you're saying. Is that true?
Basically, absolutely. But again, the festival, we have to be clear, the festival wasn't created as an anti-Jewish festival. The connection happens to fall out at the time when there was oppression and violence directed against the Jews. So there is that connection in Roman history. But it also keeps going throughout history in that it's connected to the supposed birthday of Jesus, which, by the way, is also fairly arbitrary. There's no historical basis for it. On December 25th, which is known as Christmas, you count 8 days later, we get to the new year, and given that Jesus was Jewish and was circumcised, that's also the date of his circumcision. And historically, just with the Romans, we see with Christianity, and of course Julius Caesar is pre-Christian by many centuries, but historically any events that are connected with Jesus' life and the Christian life cycle always have negative anti-Jewish violence connected to them. For instance, in Easter, which commemorates the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, on Good Friday and Easter Sunday, was always a time in Europe, especially medieval Europe, when you had what are called passion plays reenacting Jesus' arrest, crucifixion, and of course the Jews being responsible for that would lead to massive Jewish violence against the Jews in medieval Europe. It was like the worst time of year. So too, the fact that Christmas and connected to Jesus' circumcision day, January 1st, would often be an excuse for, again, more open violence against the Jewish people in medieval Europe. So what people don't realize is how many of these happy days that are celebrated as non-religious days are actually very connected in a negative way towards violence and a lot of animus towards the Jewish people.
Now, I have a question about Sylvester. When I was in America, I never heard New Year's called Sylvester, and then I got here to Israel, and that seems to be the main name that people call that. What is Sylvester, and how come people here call it that?
Right, that's a specific European reference. And again, in Europe they call it Sylvester. That's the actual name. And even in Israel, I think they use the term Sylvester. But it's named after Saint Sylvester, who was actually a pope in the 4th century, right at the 324 is the Council of Nicaea in Christian history, when Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire. And Sylvester was the leader of Christianity who oversaw the Council of Nicaea, making it that official state religion. And his death date is associated with New Year's. So it's interesting. It never entered American consciousness, but certainly in European consciousness, it's one of the other terms used. Again, giving it another specific sort of Christian reference to the day, and giving it another veneer of religious significance that is again lost, especially to people coming from the United States. So we sort of have a whole long list now of bad reasons to celebrate New Year, starting with Julius Caesar and Roman hostility towards the Jews, the events connected with the holiday of Janus, followed by all of the anti-Jewish violence that took place on Easter and on New Year's, and finally we have this association with Saint Sylvester and early Christianity in the 4th century.
But now, if you're celebrating his death, wouldn't that be a good thing? Like, Hitler, his name struck from the record of all living things. Like, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to celebrate the...
It's sort of like, not to compare the two, but at your side in Judaism, that you commemorate a person's death day doesn't mean necessarily happy they died. You're just commemorating the date that they died, but you remember it's a positive connection. And Christians also do similar things. They have days, saints' days, that are celebrating the deaths of famous Christians who either martyred or died of natural causes. So it's not that Jews are like raising a cup l'chaim to the death of the guy who brought Christianity to the Roman Empire, and therefore so much suffering to the Jewish people in history. That's not really the intention.
Well, what I don't seem to understand is if Christians want to honor the Brit Milah of Jesus, so how can they be mean to Jews? I mean, if they're willing to acknowledge that he's Jewish and that the bris is something special, then why, we just finished Hanukkah, for example, why was the bris banned if people acknowledge that their Lord and Savior had this thing? Wouldn't we be celebrated for these rituals?
Well, you bring up a very interesting point. First of all, I'm not sure really how many Christians are aware of this circumcision motif in New Year's, especially in medieval Europe, when Christians do very little about anything, especially their own Bible. But you also have to understand that there's been a huge dissociation in history between Jesus and his Jewish identity. That he was really the Jew of the story is only Judas, even though we know in the narrative everyone is Jewish in the story except for Pontius Pilate. So there's been this huge disconnect, which also explains the positive attitude that evangelicals have towards Jews, because they've re-Judaized Jesus. So now they look at all these things positively, and Jesus' Jewish identity is an integral part of their understanding of who he is, their appreciation of the Jewish people. But that's a relatively new phenomenon. So I have a feeling that the average medieval Christian violence against Jews is little aware of this Jewish connection or appreciate it in the slightest.
I still just have such a hard time understanding the concept of being anti-Semitic towards, like, if I really thought Moses was it, like, I would try and adopt his values. So I do, we say, every day we talk about Moses was one of the greatest prophet that ever lived and ever will be, and therefore we take on his values. So at what point did the values of this Jewish person, who, from my understanding, wanted very much to be a rabbi, get turned around to an excuse to be anti-Semitic?
It happens very, very early on. As a matter of fact, it wanes in history in the last few hundred years, and is quite strong early on. Like I said, the de-Judaizing of Jesus is a common motif, and all the early church fathers typically demonize the Jewish people. And I always say it sounds shocking to people, but if you could bump into the average peasant in Europe 1,000 years ago and you told that Jesus was Jewish, he would have probably hit you and yelled at you and said, "What are you talking about? Only that filthy Judas killed him." But again, you're not thinking, why theologically, if you'd ask them, okay, who was Jesus? What was his religious background? It was completely, taken out of his biography, so to speak.
So how did he get so popular?
Today, people read the Bible, and 1,000 years ago and before in Catholic Europe, the Bible was the first book on the Catholic Church's index of books you weren't allowed to read.
Wow.
So, like I always say, once you never let the facts interfere with their opinions. And just because we look at it kind of logically and rationally doesn't mean that people were doing that same thing thousands of years ago. The level of ignorance and animus and hostility directed at the Jews, and ignorance based on really lack of knowledge of any of the historical or theological context of Jesus, is responsible for all this violence. But it was a deliberate policy on the part of the Church Fathers early on to break with Judaism and to demonize the Jewish people and to not only blame them for Jesus' death, but to in an attempt to demonstrate God's rejection of the Jewish people. It was sort of a package deal. That the Jews killed Jesus, they're cursed by God, they lost Jerusalem, they'll wander the earth until he comes again, and nothing but hostility was directed at the Jews literally for centuries. And again, any Christian holidays were always just excuses for more open violence and attacks against Jews.
So Christianity looked at the gullus, the exile of the Jewish people, as something that was a result of Jews not believing in Jesus, rather than seeing that actually our prophets, our Nevi'im, spoke about that time and time again, that if the Jews didn't do tshuva or repent and follow the ways of the Torah, then they would lose Jerusalem. Is that correct?
It's actually, they needed theologically to explain the continued survival of the Jewish people. If you think about it, if God had rejected the Jews who rejected Jesus, then why did the Jew continue to survive? Now, from our perspective, we know that we're an eternal nation and God never rejects us, as you said correctly. It's a punishment. But from their perspective, they needed to create a theology to justify the continuance of the Jewish people, so they created what was called in Latin, very early on in Christianity, it was called Teste Veritatis, the witness people. The Jew, again, well, the wandering Jew legend. The cursed Jew will wander the earth until the end of days, the second coming of Jesus, which is another thing invented by Christianity, needing to explain why Jesus did not fulfill the biblical description of what the Messiah is supposed to do. So Christianity came up with that idea that he'll do it when he comes the second time in the future. And at that point, the Jew will recognize his waywardness and finally accept Jesus and himself convert.
Now, you talked about a long-standing history of anti-Semitic violence around this time period. You live in Israel now. You see what's going on here in Jerusalem and all over the world. Do you think that we should be afraid tonight and tomorrow that there'll be a rise in violence, or what should we do?
No, I would say this, no. The religious connection, especially in places like America, and certainly in Israel, where it's almost a non-event, it's a party day, is completely lost. And if you check out the ADL statistics, you will find that there's no connection between these holidays anymore and anti-Jewish violence. It's actually much more connected to the political situation in Israel and whatever radical leader decides to make some nasty comment about us. So it's not, I don't think, fear is the issue. The question, I really think, is whether it's appropriate or not. And, unlike, I would say it's much weirder for a Jew to have a Christmas tree in his house, even though Christmas trees themselves are not really. A lot of the Christians I know think that that's like really a pagan concept that somehow seeped into Christianity. But a Jew having a Christmas tree is a far more kind of radical, in-your-face idea than the sort of neutral, non-religious, sort of drunken revelry that's associated with New Year's Eve nowadays. So, while I would say it's not really an appropriate holiday for Jews, I don't think, a Jew who, out of his ignorance, celebrates the New Year's Eve and is drunk and watches the ball drop in Times Square is in any way, participating in any foreign religious rites, but rather is probably just killing off a lot of brain cells. And possibly making a lot of resolutions that won't be kept after they sober up.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. I really appreciate your commentary.
You're most welcome.
And if we want to learn more from you, what's the best way we can reach or get in touch with your teachings?
Yeah, so I have a website. It's kenspiro, KENSPIRO.com, and I have all my content, audio, written, lots of the classes and books are available for anyone who's interested. They're welcome to visit.
Thank you so much. Chodesh Tov.
Okay, that was Shira's interview with Rabbi Ken Spiro. Now, Shira, you also got a brief interview with Rabbi Yom Tov Glazer, correct?
I sure did.
Okay, let's take that away and play that clip, please.
I'm with Rabbi Yom Tov Glazer, who's on his way to teach in the Old City. Rabbi Glazer, do you think that Jews should or should not celebrate New Year's?
First of all, I think Jews should always be celebrating all the time, and every day's a new day, and every new moon's a new moon, and it's always a great time for our new year, Rosh Hashanah. But as far as the New Year's, I think it actually it's sourced in some kind of something to do with like birthdays or birthdays of JC. So I'm not that into it. It's not really. I don't think it's really our thing. But it is means, I guess, for celebrating because so many business people in the world give their end of year gifts to tzedakah or tax deductible organizations, and so it really is a new year for people who are trying to contribute to the world and need those dollars, those charity dollars.
That's a wonderful perspective. Rebbe Friedman told me, I asked her, what should I say to my friends and family back in America if they want to wish me a Happy New Year? She said, Happy Fiscal Year.
Very good. I like that. Okay.
Happy Fiscal Year, Rabbi.
All right. That was Shira's brief interview with Rabbi Yom Tov Glazer. And now Shira has a clip with an interview with Rav Gabriel.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Rav Gabriel Friedman. So take that away, please.
So this is an interview I got from Rav Gabriel Friedman at the Hanani event that he had tonight. He had the Hanani class at Uncle Jerry's house and talked to a bunch of people there and find out what their plans are. And this is what Rav Gabriel Friedman had to say about that. I'm with Rabbi Gabriel Friedman, a.k.a. Rav Gav. What's your perspective on whether Jews should or should not celebrate New Year's?
Okay, we know the Mishnah states in Pirkei Avos, part of the oral tradition, the Ezu Chacham Halomid Mikol Adam, who is a wise person, someone who learns from all people. So although perhaps in Judaism we don't celebrate the idea of January 1st as being our new year or really any significance in reference to Judaism, we can certainly learn a lesson from other nations of the world and the way that they perceive what it is. Not necessarily what they do on that day, but at least in theory. We have the concept of New Year's resolution, where a person decides, this year I'm going to X, I'm going to Y, I'm going to lose weight, I'm going to make up with my friends, I'm going to, whatever the fill in the blank. So I think it would not be a bad idea for us to reignite our own whatever that X or that Y is, and to start over. From time to time, unfortunately, as life, we get used to it and we get accustomed to the way we're living, we sometimes forget what's important to us and what goals we want to accomplish. So perhaps if we could use this to reignite our goals and our aspirations and what we want, I think it would be a wonderful thing.
It's so nice, Rabbi. But what about the implications that this day, January 1st, is the bris of JC? How does it play into not following the ways of the nation?
Right, very good. That's what I would say to you in reference to holidays and celebrating without getting too political here. But we don't celebrate holidays that have their origins in any sort of polytheism, if it is perhaps, and any sort of paganism, etc. And being that this is not a purely, as we call it, monotheistic religion and point of view, therefore we don't celebrate it. However, like I was mentioning, that doesn't mean we can't learn to become better people, right? So, to go out, get drunk, count till the ball drops, not recommended, right? To rethink and reevaluate where we are and where we're standing in our life, not a bad idea.
Great, thank you so much.
All right, that was Shira's interview with Rav Gabriel Friedman, and now Shira's going to play an interview with some students from the Birthright program.
Hi, I'm with a group from Birthright. Where are you guys from?
From all over the country, in the United States.
And tomorrow is traditionally New Year's. How do you normally, when you're in America, United States, celebrate New Year's?
Usually parties, a bunch of different ways. I like to spend time with my family and friends.
But now, this year, you're far away from your family and friends. Do you have any New Year's plans?
We're climbing Masada tomorrow and also going to the Dead Sea during the day. And for the evening, I don't think we're really sure yet.
I'm sure that we'll have some little shindig that we'll eventually come up with. But at the moment, it's just going to be being with each other.
Do you know the history of New Year's in terms of what it actually marks and whether or not Jews should or should not celebrate it?
It marks the end of the Gregorian calendar, I believe. Like, the Jewish calendar is different from the Gregorian. So I guess as Americans we celebrate it, but not as Jews. So I don't really know if there's a difference between the two as of the moment.
You guys were trying to figure something out. What is it that you're trying to figure out?
We were trying to figure out how many days there are between Christmas Eve, and the 31st of December to see if it's like a certain number of days after Christmas, and that being connected to why Jews should or should not celebrate it.
You're absolutely right. If Jesus was born on December 25th, which he actually wasn't, but let's say that that's when his birth is celebrated, so 7 days later would be January 1st. Do you know? I'm looking for you. Would it be actually what it marks? Hold on a second. Are you Rabbi Kellerman?
Rabbi Zeldman.
Zeldman. I'm sorry. I'm asking this birthright group if they should or should not study or celebrate New Year's. Do you have any perspective on a rabbinic point of view? Is New Year's a holiday that Jews should or should not celebrate, and what exactly does it mark?
I really have 10 seconds. I'm running to a class. I think for people today, it's very understandable that even though New Year's has a Christian origin, people relate to it as a very secular, national kind of holiday. I wouldn't look down on somebody who decides to celebrate New Year's. I think they should see past it, though, and realize there's better ways of celebrating a real New Year, like a Jewish New Year, by being introspective and thinking about life, rather than getting drunk and forgetting about life.
And what about, as a person in Jerusalem, do you know what Sylvester is and what it marks?
Yeah, St. Sylvester. I don't know a lot about it, but I do know that it's highly ironic that a day that really commemorates a quote-unquote saint who was involved in massacres becomes the Jewish name for Jewish New Year's. You can't get any more perverse than that. That's all I can tell you.
If a person in yeshiva that is learning with you is more educated than, let's say, their friends or family back home, what advice would you give them if their friends wanted to wish them a Happy New Year? What should they say?
I think they should say Happy New Year to be polite, because otherwise you just look weird and people don't understand where you're coming from. But to take a chance to say, use it as a chance to say, if you think a little bit about what New Year really is, it's not something that we as Jews should see as part of our culture. We should get past it.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
All right. That was Shira Nussdorf's interview with Rabbi Ken Spiro, Rabbi Yom Tov Glazer, Rabbi Gabrielle Freeman, and a little bit from the Birthright Kids and Rabbi Zeldman. Shira, great job. We appreciate your work this week. Excellent job as always.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank everyone for tuning in. That's today's episode of Is It Prophecy on Israel National Radio, Arut Sheva. The show is syndicated as Messiah Hour on YouTube. Email me, messiahhour@gmail.com. Everyone have a great day.